Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to 1% Better, where we take a look at hidden stories in sport. I'm Xylon. Not only am I joined by Dr. David Lipwin this week, but I'm actually sitting in his desk in his house and I've kicked him out of his office. How does that feel?
Feels okay. I'm a very kind guy, very giving, so I've given you the good space to record in, mate, so enjoy.
You seem to be recording this from your wife's makeup stand. Gonna test some of the makeup out there?
Something like that. It's our walk-in desk in the walking room. It's where she works from, the infrequent times where she has to work from home. So, in the previous house, she got the good office and I got the less good one. And in this house, it's the other way around.
Well, I appreciate this. Thank you. Regular listeners who might be watching this on video will recognize the background behind me. It looks quite funny. But you're not going to get out of this one. You're not getting out of the doctor's question. Don't distract me. Your doctor's question this week is: what is the main physiological explanation for the second wind endurance athletes often feel after struggling early in a run?
Okay, I don't even know the answer to that. I guess the answer is endorphins, like they'll say. I don't know if there is a good one.
Well, the answer I have here, tell me if you agree with it, is it's primarily due to the switch to more efficient energy pathways once the body reaches metabolic steady state. So increased oxygen delivery, stabilized breathing, and improved lactate clearance. Basically, everything eventually syncs up. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I guess if they're talking about a second wind being there in the matter of minutes and you didn't do a warm up, then yeah, that sounds perfect. If you did a warm up and the second wind comes at 2 hours, I'm not convinced that's what's happened. So welcome to ChatGPT hallucinating again.
It would be worrying if it took 2 hours for everything to sync up and finally
Exactly
work.
right. Exactly right. So that one's a fail, mate. Not such a good
Okay,
one. Not your best
we
work.
Uh, thanks, appreciate it.
You're
We are
welcome.
we are supported by Precision Fuel and Hydration. They've got an interesting blog on their website actually with Chrissy Wellington. She's a four-time Ironman world champion, and she was talking about how she fueled and how fueling has changed. Did you find that interesting?
Yeah, I was just going through their website in general because their blog is so good. They've got such good resources on it, and they've got a blog on heat training and like how to do it and all that stuff. They've got a blog on cooling. They've got blogs on carb loading, caffeine use. Like, if you have a question like sports science, nutrition related, you may as well start there on their blog, I reckon, because they've also got links to references and stuff. So like they do a really good job there. Kudos to them in that respect. Yeah, the interesting article. Well, it was interesting reading the Chrissy Wellington article because I thought it would be like she was getting by on the sniff of a wet rag. She's actually feeling around 60 grams an hour, which isn't bad, particularly for when she was going for it. So that's quite interesting. She said she'd probably bump that up a bit, which I don't think anybody would argue that she should bump that up a wee bit. Or not many would argue, at least. That's not fair to say. But yeah, not many would argue, and she would agree. And it'd be low risk for her to bump that up as well, I think. I don't think going from 60 to 90 grams is a real challenge, provided you're not using glucose only or maltodextrin only.
It is fascinating how endurance sports have changed, where athletes are now taking 100, particularly elite athletes, 120 grams of carbs an hour. But if you'd like to be like any of those athletes, we would highly recommend you check out Precision Fuel and Hydration. And good news for you, we've got a 15% discount code on your first purchase. That code is the number one, PB2025. We also have a link in the show notes down below that'll directly apply that discount. How are you doing, mate? It's good to be with you here in London. It's good to see your lifestyle. I mean, I'm going out for dinner with you. Colin Firth walks in, you and him are big buddies. You high five each other, say hello. And I'm like, man, this guy's a baller. This is the lifestyle this guy leads here in London.
Well, I'm not sure that happened, mate. I think you might be embellishing a little bit. But no, it's been good to have you around, mate.
No, don't skip over it. Were we at a restaurant and was Colin Firth there?
Yeah, he walked into the restaurant. That's fine. That's very different to me high-fiving him. But yes. No, you crashed date night, and that was okay, mate. We liked having you along, so that was nice. It's been good having you about. You haven't been doing much, mate. You didn't microwave any yogurt this morning, unfortunately. I was like, had the video ready, but you decided not to microwave your yogurt. Otherwise, mate, you've been a nice house guest. It's been good. I'm just interested in how many more times you're going to ask me how best for you to get to the airport, then change your mind, and then recheck the answer with Google, and then go again. Other than that, it's been very normal from you.
While you have your beautiful London transport system here, which I know you're a big advocate of and a big fan of.
Jeez, mate.
I'm being sarcastic if listeners didn't
Yeah.
realize that. But it's good. It's been good to be here. I mentioned on last week's episode I was here for Rouleur Live, which is like the biggest exhibition show in cycling, and we were on stage announcing the very first women's UCI Continental team from Africa, with the goal of making it to the Tour de France from Weg Zwift within 3 years. And it was amazing to see how that news was released. Really great to see people out here in the UK understanding that sport has to globalize. Sport needs new continents, it needs new heroes, it needs new faces, it needs new stories to tell for professional sport to grow. So it was great to be well received, and we'll see how that goes.
We should check that video that you guys debuted in the show notes. I'll put it in there. It's of Savarine's stuff. I think it was a really cool video. So it's about 13 minutes
Yeah.
YouTube video. So for those interested, well worth a watch. So go check that out in the show notes there.
How's your running going? I woke up one of the mornings and I just heard you stomping away on the treadmill here.
Yeah, the elephant was going for it. Yeah, running's going fine, mate. It's a little bit of a lighter week last week, just by virtue of like all the stuff I had to go do. You dropped me in it a bit, so I had to go into the town to present for you and do a few other things. So it sort of cut some of my running time short, but that's okay. Strength training's been going really well. I'm gaining a lot of strength really quickly, which is nice. Showing that the what people call muscle memory, or there's lots of more technical terms for it, but that's sort of in full flight, which has been good. So yeah, mate, I'm enjoying the strength stuff. Running is good enough, and yeah, we'll see how we go. I don't know. Someone asked me the day if I've got a pen a bib on anytime soon, and I sort of said I'm not averse to it, but there's nothing that excites me to make me do it yet. So let's see. Maybe something will excite me sooner or later.
How are you measuring that you are getting stronger quickly? Just by virtue of lifting heavier weights?
Exactly. That's a nice thing. Like if the weights go up, so you could do more.
Okay. Listen, get that smirk off your face. My school teacher told me there's no such thing as stupid questions. But evidently, as I became an adult, I learned there are such thing as stupid questions. We're supported by Stride on this podcast. Did you notice Mika Nurt, who broke the tape at T100 this past weekend? And I mean, if listeners have been following this, don't worry. We're going to talk about it shortly. But he was wearing Stride on both of his shoes.
Yeah, so he's wearing the Duo. It was quite interesting to see that, particularly given he wasn't wearing a watch, which may have helped the situation. But we'll get to that in a second, as we alluded to. I think in a triathlon context, it'd be interesting using Stride because you don't have to wait for GPS, because you could you'd be linked to your strides and you just go for it, which is quite an interesting way to do it. You could have your watch just linked to your strides, but I guess they probably do that anyway. They probably just link to the satellites and then leave it there. But you certainly get a better handle on, again, without GPS issues, which you may or may not have in big buildings in Dubai. So I don't know. It's interesting. I'd be cool. I'd love to talk to him about how he uses the data. I wonder if he's using it because there's so many uses for Stride, right? You've got the sort of, we use it for as a distance alternative. We use it for pacing. You can also use it for all these other run-related metrics, gait metrics that might be interesting to see how you decay across a run. So yeah, I'd love to know what he's using it for.
So you could connect it directly to your watch, the pods to your watch, and then
You do
have
that.
okay.
Yep. And then
And
you can use that to get your distance rather than GPS.
interesting. Oh wow.
So you
Oh,
don't have to worry about like losing GPS signal. And I mean, Marco Altini does this because he's like, I don't like the fact that GPS signal is patchy. It's not about, for him, it's regardless of accuracy, it's more about precision, which is when I run X, I want it to say X every time. Or when I run X, I want it to at least say Y every time. It doesn't matter that Y isn't X. It matters that Y is always Y when I've always run X, right? So he wants the reproducibility of it. And you certainly get that versus, say, like classically in London, you go through Canary Wharf and your GPS drops out. So, yeah, it's sort of that's where Stride really comes through strong in that respect.
Oh, I'm even more bummed now that I'm not running. I'd love to test that out, man. But we do have a link in the show notes if you'd like to check Stride out, and we highly recommend you do so. Let's get through some community shout outs. Was it last week that we were having a discussion on here? We gave Lustam Korsi, one of our very loyal super fans, a shout out because you found it quite funny that he was taking a photo on a run in front of a very beautiful blue BMW. And I told you I had a very good good inclination, and that probably isn't his BMW, which turns out is the case. And then I love that Spencer Lauderbeck, our chief meme officer, sent us a selfie with him and his wife in front of a yacht, and they're like, hashtag not our yacht. I love this community, man.
So good. It was so good. I noticed you didn't put the joke in, mate. I wrote a joke for you there. You didn't put it in.
What was the joke?
That he took a photo in someone else's yacht, in front of someone else's yacht, which is a little yachty. You're welcome. You're welcome.
This is why I saw you prepping the document and going, "Oh, I'm so funny. I am so funny." That's very good from me. I'm guessing you were referring to that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was referring to.
Well, someone else who thought I was funny last week when I made a very lame joke was Jack Farlow. Thanks so much for your Spotify comment, Jack Farlow, who thought the David Lipman joke was funny. Spencer Lauderbeck also replied to that and said, well, can't trust the listeners because when I was microwaving my yogurt, other listeners also thought that was okay. So
yeah, well, I know Jack. Jack's a professional CrossFit athlete, so it's cool that he's part of the community and listens. We are going to get him on the podcast at one point. We just need to work out a time and work out what we're going to talk to him about. But as I responded to Jack on social media, he said, I thought that was funny. And I said, it's okay, we can't all be right. So
should we rattle off a quick few more community shoutouts here? Is
that
English? A quick few more shoutouts.
Yeah. So ish. So first one's to Toby Schmitz. So Toby actually is the chief product officer at or head of product at Core, and so he ran and we talked about him a little while ago. He ran the Frauenfelder half marathon. He ran 76 for a 3-minute PB, which is right on track. I'm convinced Toby's going to run a really fast marathon on the roads. He's more of a trail runner, and I sort of said to him, "Listen, get going." And yeah, this is a great example of how high his potential is. I reckon Toby's going to be real fast on the roads. So, that was cool.
Also, shout out to a very good friend of mine, Hishan Barner, who did Ironman 70.3 Mossel Bay yesterday. Shout out to Andres Vegan, who did the Tourage LBT 17, finished in second place, so not bad at all. And then
Andreas seems to just race every week. I love it. He's forever racing and forever placing. So congratulations, Andreas. That's cool. And then Jonathan Coates as well. Congratulations. Ran 47 at the Fulham 10K. Just across the water here from us. So
okay. That is quick.
And then we had Pedro Almeida responded to us. So a couple of weeks ago, after the sad passing of your dog, we talked about Sakatsubo cardiomyopathy. And Pedro Almeida responded to us on email or emailed us. And I love this email. Thank you so much, Pedro. He said, fun fact about this. There are rare case reports of Sakatsubo-like cardiomyopathy being triggered by spicy or pungent foods, including wasabi. For example, a 2017 case in the European Heart Journal described a woman who developed Sakatsubo cardiomyopathy after eating wasabi mistakenly thinking it was avocado. And then the presumed mechanism was an intense sympathetic surge, sudden stress response, from the pain and shock of the wasabi's pungency, similar to the sudden adrenaline rush. Quite hilarious. I actually found that paper, and sad for the lady, and whatever, but like that, it's a wild story. We do have. I found this paper and put a link to it in the show notes for those who are interested in reading the case report. And can confirm she did think it was guacamole, apparently. Which, when you think about how people eat guacamole and how they eat wasabi, I can understand why this caused a problem.
Wow, that's hectic, man. And then we also got a listener question in from Gabrielle Aoki. I hope I said that name right. The question I have is, if you have races under normal weather conditions like 20 to 25 degrees Celsius, is heat training still a valid tool to improve the performance overall?
Yeah, so we put out a story from Knowledge is What. So shout out to Knowledge is What on Instagram about the Bent Ronstad study about overdressing. So firstly, 20 to 25 degrees isn't normal weather, or rather, maybe it is normal weather, but that is beyond a temperature where heat will play a factor. It's like above 12 degrees, so like Celsius, which is like 50 something degrees Fahrenheit, whereas 20 is more like 70 something degrees Fahrenheit. So like a big difference there. So first thing, so 20 to 25 degrees Celsius, I think heat training works and it is helpful. We talked on the episode a couple of weeks back with Lindsay Hunt, Dr. Lindsay Hunt, and he talked about this, and we said about cold conditions. And his thought was that, from my memory anyway, and you're better off going to listen to the episode than listening to my recounting of the episode. But his take was kind of events that were more influenced by VO2 max, and we'll talk about this in a little while with some cyclists, where you're talking about like 5K, 10K, sort of shorter stuff, shorter duration stuff, that is going to have more impact of heat work for cold racing, because the heat stuff helps sort of hemoglobin mass, which is more of a VO2 max issue, or more related to VO2 max. Then we sort of had a bit more of a discussion. I sort of talked about the downsides of it and potential downsides of it. And where we landed on this a little bit was like, one of the downsides is you do sweat more. So if you're a bigger person, so like we had breakfast with someone the other day who was quite surprised that I'd run as fast as I did. And we sort of surmised it was perhaps because I was a bit bigger. So if you're big like me and you're in cold conditions, say running a marathon, it may actually end up being a problem because you sweat so much and you generate more heat and sweat more as a bigger person potentially. So there's certainly that caveat of maybe it's not as helpful in the cold. But I think some of this is also individual. We've got good research on heat training, but there is some individual nuance in terms of how much response you get, what your sweat rate becomes, those sort of things. And I think there's some individuality and nuance that we'll get to. It'll probably be 5 to 10 years away before we start to really titrate like who's going to get what benefit at what sort of intensities. But it's a good question, and I appreciate it, Gabriel.
You might be wondering why we're talking about heat training so much on the podcast at the moment, and that is because we are supported by core body temperature sensors. Keep an eye out on our Instagram page, 1% Better Pod. We got some big news coming there soon, so make sure you're following us there. But David, I wanted to ask you how your heat training is going, because as you alluded to, you said earlier, like you ran on the treadmill the other day, and when we left, you were still sweating for ages afterwards. I'm also going to put up a screenshot here is that from the Core Body Temperature app? That screenshot you sent me.
I'm a heat champion now, so I cracked the 90%, which makes you a heat champion. I'll probably get close to 100 this week. That's the goal, is to get to 100%, finish the game. But yeah, so I was in that. You didn't come down and see that room, mate, but that room, or you didn't feel that room, but it's got a heater that we can't turn off, so it's hot. And you close the door, and then you're generating heat. It's a pretty small room, so it gets pretty bad. And I was overdressed on there, so yeah, it was pretty tough, but good. So yes, thank you to Core for their sponsorship. Do follow. We do have a link in the show notes. Please follow that, particularly if you're going to buy a Core sensor. That would help us a lot by you following that link in the show notes.
Right, let's have a look at what's come across my desk. Should we start with some quick bits first?
Yep.
You were shouting this across the room to me the other day. Living with this guy is like a real life podcast all the time. You shouted Jim Walmsley just ran a 10K in France, and you seemed very impressed by it.
Yeah, around 32:40, which is pretty impressive. This is on the roads in Paris. He's got a PB. So he used to be a track athlete in college, to be clear. He's got a 29-minute and 8-second PB in the 10,000 meters on track from 2012. But I mean, this guy's aging. This is really impressive. He also ran a 64-minute half in Houston in 2019 to qualify him for the Olympic trials, where he ran 2:15 in 2020. And in September, he ran the Long Trail World Championships, won that race. It was 82 kilometers, like 50 miles or so, 51 miles in 8 hours 35. So like to be able to go that far and that fast in the Trail World Champs, and then like a couple months later come back and run a 32-minute 10K. Yeah, it's very impressive.
We talked about salary caps last week, and looks like it's something the UCI has brought up as well. I think teams will be voting on this. They did vote on it, I think.
Well, they knocked it back. They weren't keen, which is interesting. And particularly the smaller ones were not keen, which is so interesting to me. I'm like, how is that not a thing? They're all complaining about like the arms race and how it was like cycling's getting boring and how they can't compete. And then they wanted to block it. So I'm not sure why. I have two thoughts here. My only guess is that they all think they're going to land a big sponsor and they don't want to be inhibited by that. And the second thing I would say is I reckon this would help the sport, but there's always a way to get people. And, I used to work at a club with low resources, a couple of them in my coaching career in rugby clubs. And there's always something you can offer. And one thing you may be able to offer is just opportunity. Like, Primoz Roglic, like, come to our team because you'll actually be the main guy, right? Whereas a Bora, you're not. So there's certainly that as well. Now, in cycling, that's a little bit harder because you need a team around you as well. But nonetheless, it's quite interesting.
I'm fascinated by that. I want to double click on it a little later on, actually, and go once we off and go research and see why the smaller teams would have voted against that. But I think I do agree with you. It's that they think there might be a windfall later on for them, and they don't want to be limited by it. We spoke about Imogen Simmonds. She tested positive a little while ago, and then a few weeks ago we announced that she actually won her case, so she is eligible to race again, and she's back to racing at Laguna Phuket and T100 in Qatar.
Yes, this is upcoming. This will be interesting to see. I mean, it's good to see her back on the horse, metaphorically, and get going. This is going to be hard. Like, if people struggle to train during COVID, imagine struggling when when you may not ever be able to compete again.
That
Right?
kind of uncertainty, yeah.
Yeah.
That kind of uncertainty.
So let's see how she goes. We'll follow it. We'll update you all. But yeah, best wishes to Imogen, and let's see how it goes.
I know you love this kind of content. It is off season for professional cycling, and cyclists always run during the off season. Have you found some examples that you've loved?
Yeah, so I mean, Van der Poel was the one that started making news. Then I think Valencia on Instagram decided to pull together some other times. So, like, there's a bunch of guys here. So Ben Swift ran a 16-minute 7-second 5K, a 33:10 10K. Van der Poel did a 16:48 5K and a 33:41 10K. Eddie Dunbar ran a 15:26 5K. And Bart Lemon ran a 16:05 10K and a 33-minute 30 10K. Now, if you think they all sound very similar, they do, and they are from a standpoint. So that should give you enough insight here. So these guys have obviously got huge engines, right? Don't get me wrong. Enormous engines, big VO2 maxes. And that's why you'll run fast 5 and 10Ks. But you will struggle when that goes beyond there with durability issues. And now that durability could be with respect to injury, but more likely it's just physiological durability because the muscles will start to be a limiting factor more so than these big engines. So it's quite interesting to see this. It's interesting that those times are also similar. It speaks to how physiologically similar these guys are from a training perspective. And then apparently Van der Poel's going to do an Ironman because Freddie Ovett put out a reel of him running and said, if I get 100K likes on this reel, then Van der Poel will do an Ironman, and that went viral. So yeah, we'll see that. I mean, Van der Poel will be a good Ironman. He just needs to spend some time to actually develop some durability there in the running, I reckon.
No chance he's doing that while he's a pro cyclist.
No.
But yeah, those times are so interesting because, I mean, we mentioned Jim Walmsley, who went quicker than that, 32:40. We had also mentioned Jonathan Coates, who in the Fulham 10K went 30:47. So those pro cyclists are quick, but not as quick as people conditioned for running, it seems like. And I don't know the course difference and where people ran and whatever.
Yeah, but I don't think it's that real. I mean, those are all Strava times. Like, don't take them all with a grain of salt. Suffice to say, the other two blokes are quicker. I don't think that's up for debate. They're 20 seconds plus quicker. Like, yeah, they're quicker. Yeah, it comes down to, again, we talked about, we've got a Determinants of Endurance Performance podcast that explains all this in depth. But basically, like, VO2 max is part of it, but so is efficiency or economy, or running economy particularly. And so, like, the other guys like Jonathan Coates and Jim Walmsley are much better economical runners, and then they're much more durable as well. So, like, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest because durability isn't a big factor, but it is a factor. If this was a 1,500 meters, it'd be interesting. Right now, you have guys with an enormous engine racing other guys who are coming down distances. That's a very different question. Just like I'd be certain that I'd back those guys in over a marathon to absolutely wallop the cyclists. So, yeah.
Let's move on. I feel like we've talked about this before, or it seems like the women's 100-mile record is getting broken all the time. Or am I missing something here? But Ireland's Catriona Jennings broke the women's 100-mile world record.
That's Katrina, mate. That's one of those Irish spellings. That's actually not that Irish, but whatever. So she just broke the 100-mile world record. She debuted at the distance, which was really impressive. So she was first female in this race, fourth overall. She ran 12 hours, 37 minutes and 4 seconds. That's 4:42 per kilometer or 7:34 per mile, which would beat Camille Herron's record from 2017 on that same course. She previously took third place in the 100K World Champs and the Comrades a few years back, and she holds Irish records in the 50 and 100K. She also ran a 2:36 marathon in Rotterdam in 2012, just after, a little while after the Olympics, or before the Olympics would have been. The London Olympics where she competed as well. So pretty impressive stuff there.
The next thing I want to talk about is I found really interesting. It's another thing you shouted at me across the kitchen. The UCI Esports World Championships took place a couple of days ago, and you found this really interesting that they are cracking down on pre-sauna use with hydration checks. Now, talk to me about why they would do this. Why is this relevant?
Well, you've probably got better insight than me, but basically, like when you do esports, they need your weight
Wait, yeah,
so they can get watts per kilo, right? And so
yeah.
you effectively cycle and then it's normalized that way. Whereas on a bike, that's automatically built in, right? When you're outdoors, like that, you are what you are. So because of that, they need to weigh you in. And because weigh-ins are weigh-ins, people cut weight, just like they do in every other sport, weightlifting, wrestling, all of it. So, and one of those ways is to sweat it out or to pee it out if you use diuretics. So to combat this, basically the UCI is making you pass a hydration test where they test the specific gravity of your urine, which is basically like how much water compared to everything else is there in your urine. And the more concentrated it is, the higher the specific gravity, etc. And so if it's too concentrated, you're too dehydrated, therefore you're out. You got to go drink water and then come back to normal. And once you've passed your hydration test, then you can weigh in basically. And this is all 4 hours before. So I don't know if significant dehydration to then try and rehydrate over 4 hours would impair your performance or not. I think it would depend on the race length and a few other variables, but it probably would impair your performance, I would say. I certainly, like, listen, when I was weightlifting, doing Olympic weightlifting, yeah, this is very standard from us. Like, I didn't lift too low. I should have lifted probably 2 categories lower than I did. I would just skip breakfast, go weigh in, and then go eat breakfast, and I'd be fine. I'd make weight and then not have to worry about it. But, I certainly could have gone down a couple weight categories and then had to sweat some out and all that sort of stuff. But I wouldn't have been that competitive 2 categories down. So I certainly wasn't competitive in the one I was in. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to see this because the weight has a big impact on your indoor trainer settings. So good to see the UCI cracking down on this. Man, we cannot have an episode this week without talking about this. The T100. It took place over the weekend, and what a mess in the men's race with regards to results and extra laps. And let's do a bit of a deep dive into this. I want to talk about this.
Firstly, it's not that we don't want to talk about the women. The women had a good race and it was fine and no controversy. Like, congratulations to the winner. They did well. I watched part of it. It was good. Julie Duron came back from injury. She did well. Awesome. And look, I'm happy they fixed it for the women's race. Let's put it that way. But we're not going to go super in depth on exactly what happened here. There's tons of articles written about it. I'm sure any number of triathlon podcasts will go into it. But basically what happened was on the bike, Hayden Wild, Mathis Margerier, and Martin Van Riel came in to where they should have turned off to finish the bike. It didn't look like they were going to turn off. Hayden's apparently said on his head unit he had 76 Ks and it was an 8K loop. So he thought, I have to do another one. They went around again, those 3. The 4th place guy, Sam Dickinson from the from the UK, rolls into transition. Is like, what's going on here? Why am I first? I shouldn't be first. Puts his gear on and gets going, runs. He then comes through to finish his 2K loop. And again, just for clarity, 80K bike, 18K run. The run loop was 2Ks. The bike loop was like 8Ks with the bits and pieces or whatever. So that should tell you a lot about like how many laps these guys were doing. And we'll get to that later. Sam Dickinson goes out his loop, comes through, and he's running through. And then Hayden Wild comes in transition. Is like, why are there bikes here? I'm in first. To yells to fan explains sort of to him. He starts cussing and like runs up to Sam. Dickinson's like, what's the story here? And he's like, oh, you did an extra loop. He's like, no, I didn't. We were short or whatever. No one really knows the answer here. They run through. Hayden runs fastest time of day, like smokes everyone on the run, but still only comes like 8th. But then to add insult to injury, they're rolling along, they're running, and Morgan Pearson's leading it, Mika Newton's second, and whatever else behind him. All good. Morgan Pearson keeps running, and they shoot, and he's running, everyone's like, all right, he's coming into the finish or whatever. Or he was running, and then all of a sudden they show the finish line, and Mika Newt gets there, sheepishly like lifts the tape and is like, what's going on here? And Morgan's kept running. And I think from what I can ascertain, Morgan had correctly run the 8th loop. The others were like marshaled in to finish, and they were like, okay, cool, I'll finish then. And so they finish, and Morgan's kept on running his 8th loop. They've run 7. So what they ended up doing was awarding it to Morgan after hours of deliberation. They awarded it to Morgan.
Oh,
Mukanuk got second. Obviously, Hayden Wild is like filthy about this, etc., because he was given no signal to roll in. And I guess I was thinking about this a lot. So let's go to what they said. The official statement was, due to a technical issue with the lap counting board and timing, the official result from the Dubai T100 men's race was determined after the 7th lap, which was the last known timing and follows World Triathlon guidelines. So take what you want from that. Morgan Pearson won it. Mikanu got second. Pretty hollow victories, and they felt funny. I think Mikanu put out a good statement around this. He felt really bad for the guys who were in front because they were on one and all that. So when things like this happen, I was just thinking about it, and my experiences with medical emergencies, right, or medical mistakes, and the model that's used there is actually come from aviation. It's called the Swiss cheese model, whereby it's never one thing that creates a problem. It's always like 5 or 6 things that happen, and then you end up with a hole in your cheese, metaphorically. So in this case, it's a mixture of things. The course is a mess. There's like 1,000 loops. You can't be doing that. I reckon on a bike, like 4 loops, 20K loops is pretty reasonable.
yeah.
So I'd say something like that. 3 to 4 loops is ideal for a bike or less. I'd say on the run, probably similar. Like 3 loops is ideal, kind of 6K loops, but like you want to do more, like you want to make it 4 loops, fine. Like that's fine. But we can't, yes, they're professionals and they have to know, but also they're racing and there's all sorts of things going. We can't ask them to like have to count that many loops because it gets a bit fuzzy. Like it's a little bit easier to remember. Yeah, it's a little bit easier to remember how many you've done. And many of these guys and girls don't wear watches for whatever reason, right? And I'm like, fair enough. You want to not wear a watch, that's fine. But also, if you're wearing a watch or you've got a bike head unit, sometimes it gives you the wrong number because it's not 100% perfect. So then you end up, like in this case, the bike potentially misled Hayden in this context. So it's a little bit hard. So I think that's an issue. And then there's obviously lap counter issues and official issues. But like in the NFL, if you look at the NFL, the guys have got weird things on their wrists and in their fingers. These weird like elastics. They're black. Because at one time, back in the day, someone made a mistake and got the down wrong. And they still, to this day, they are tracking it. Every official has on their hand, and then the game official has it as well. Like there are ways and means we could do this from a like counting perspective. So anyway, what I'm getting at is like I think there's lots of solutions here that need to be a bit better, or lots of situations that need to be improved a little bit here. The PTO took it on the shins though. Like if you look at Martin Van Riel's thing, he's like the winner today was Iron Man. I'm so angry at
Yes.
I'm angry at the PTO. It shouldn't be called a professional triathletes organization. I put so much into it this year and prioritized it, and this is how they reward me. And I was like, yeah, I mean, yeah, you certainly, it hasn't rewarded some of the people who are very loyal to the series this year through a number of ways. So let's see. I mean, I'll watch the space. Like they're struggling in many ways. Ironman's come back. We talked about this a little while ago. They sort of come back and responded to the payment stuff, and now all of a sudden people are back racing Ironman rather than prioritizing T100. So let's see what happens. They've changed the series for next year. We talked about that on a previous episode as well. So let's keep an eye on it.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Very, very interesting to see where this go. But yeah, big winners from the weekend. Ironman. Valencia Marathon Elite Fields have been released. The race is on the 7th of December, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, there or thereabouts. First weekend in December always. This will be interesting. So like the women's fields, the elite, I won't go through everybody, but like big names, Amani Bariso, Shankulu. So she's a 2:14:58 runner. She was 5th in Boston this year. She was 3rd in Tokyo last year, 5th in the Olympics. She was 1st in the World Championships prior to that, and in 2023, and 2nd in Boston that year. So her PB is from Valencia in 2022. So she's a previous winner, I think, and ran 2:14:15 there. So then there's Peres Jepchirchir. She was 1st in the last World Championships we just had. She's run 2:16:16. She won London last year. She was 1st in Boston in 22. And then Jocelyn Jepkosgei is 2:16 runner, 2:16:24. She was 2nd in London this year, 3rd in London for her PB last year. So that's quite interesting. And then other people in the field that people would have heard of, Sakura D'Amato, the American, she's actually ranked 4th with her 2:19. So it'll be interesting to see her run on this course. Charlotte Purdue's there, 2:22 from Great Britain. Then Rose Saba from South Africa is also 2:22, which will be great to see. Jess Stenson, Izzy Bat Doyle and Jen Gregson are all there from Australia. So there's a little Australian contingent that seems to go to there every year, which will be good to see them racing. They're all sort of 2:22, 2:23 runners. Emma Bates is there. She's a 2:23 runner from the States. She's never really run a flat course. I'm really excited to see her running. Lindsay Flanagan from the States is there as well. There is it does have here Rose Harvey racing. I'm not sure Rose is going to race. She's been dealing with a bit of an injury. She's actually a precision athlete. She's been doing a bunch of swimming, so I'm not convinced she's going to run a marathon. Stand corrected if I'm wrong. Feel free, Rose, if you're listening, feel free to message me. She only lives up the road here. So anyway, the point is, I don't think Rose is racing, but she's on the list. And, fingers crossed she is racing. That'd be great for her, but I'm not convinced.
How's the men's field looking? Was this race not on Phil Sessman's list?
Yeah, it is on his list, and I think he's racing it, but I don't know how he's not on this list of people here. Maybe because he hadn't run fast enough at the time it was released, or since. It's quite interesting because, listen, the slowest guy on this is Clayton Young, who's run 2:08 from the US, and he's actually scratching because he's injured now. I've seen Spencer Ladderback sent that through to me. I'm not sure because I think he was a 2:08 something. So I think he's chasing 2:07. So I think you're right. So I think he's probably just a little bit off this list. Although there's a couple guys here.
He was 2:07 something. I think he was. That's why I'm
You're
surprised.
Right. Yeah, it is strange. I'm not sure. Maybe
the reason why we're going back and forth with him is because we had a fantastic episode with him. So if you haven't checked that out, you'd go and listen to a few weeks ago. We spoke to Phil Sessman. But who else is on here? Who else is running?
So Cisse Lema from Ethiopia. So he's a previous winner of Boston in 2024. He came 10th in Valencia 2024 as well. And there was a Boston DNF this year. So he's been a while. But he's a 2:01.48 guy. He's quick.
Wow.
I believe he ran I can't remember where he ran 2:01, but it was far somewhere. I was surprised by it. And then Haile Mariam Quiros is a 2:04.35. He was first in Sydney this year, 5th in Berlin in 2024 for that PB, and then 4th in Tokyo in 2024. Hilary Kipkowicz is 2:04.45. So he was 7th in London this year, DNF in the World Champs, and then 8th in Valencia for his PB last year. So then there's a couple of Germans. So Samuel Fitwi, so he's 2:04.56. He won Hanover this year. His PB was from Valencia last year, which is the national record for 9th. And he took that from Amanal Petros, who's also racing. So 2:04.58 guy. Was 2nd in the World Champs in that sprint finish. The happiest second place I've ever seen. Particularly that close, and then 8th in London. So that was, that's interesting. And there's the only other, there's a couple of guys here. Nick Navarro, the French guy, who's been running really quickly, so it's 2:05, is racing. Andy Buchanan from Australia is also racing. And then we mentioned Clayton Young, who's a probable scratching from what I understand. But hopefully not for, again, I'd love to be wrong on that and see Clayton run, but I don't think so.
Mate, you a little while ago had a discussion, an interview with Tommy Wood, Associate Professor Tommy Wood, who's a neuroscientist, researcher, and athletic performance consultant. How did that chat go?
It was really good. So we talked a lot of stuff there. We talked a bit about brain health. We talked about concussion. We talked about some of the stuff that's happening with concussions, given the relatively recent news at the time, still a little bit less recent now, news of Lewis Moody and his diagnosis. We talked a lot about that. Tommy's a really smart guy, really switched on. There's a lot for listeners in this, not just about concussion, those things, but also, sort of brain health in general. So I appreciate Tommy's time and yeah.
Oh, let's get to Associate Professor Tommy Wood.
Associate Professor Tommy Wood is a neuroscientist, researcher, and athletic performance consultant. He currently works in the Department of Pediatrics and Neuroscience at the University of Washington, where his laboratory focuses on brain health across a lifespan, conducting research that focuses on ways to treat a range of brain injuries. This includes babies born preterm, adults who've experienced brain trauma, and the confluence of factors that affect long-term cognitive function and risk of dementia. In addition to this, Tommy holds positions at the Institute of Human and Machine Cognition, is a founding trustee and director of the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine, and an editorial board member of the Journal of Metabolic Health. Tommy received his bachelor's degree in biochemistry from the University of Cambridge, a medical degree from the University of Oxford, and his PhD in physiology and neuroscience from the University of Oslo. His day-to-day is extremely varied, encompassing performance consultancy to professional athletes in multiple sports, including several Olympians and world champions, consulting to various startups, and podcasting on the Better Brain Fitness podcast. With all his spare time, Tommy has found the time to write a book, The Stimulated Mind, Future-Proof Your Brain from Dementia and Stay Sharp at Any Age, releasing March 24, 2026. And far from being all talk, Tommy practices what he preaches, speaking 5 languages and fathering 2 boxers, Bowen and Morgan. Moreover, true to his Viking roots, Tommy is gifted in the bicep department and enjoys lifting heavy things, competing in strongman competitions. Tommy, welcome to the 1% Better podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, David. You didn't read me that last bit of my bio. I enjoyed that. That was an unexpected surprise. But those are the most important parts of my bio, my boxes, and the fact that I occasionally enjoy lifting heavy things.
Yes. Well, we always leave a little Easter egg there at the end to sort of help the guests warm up, and they're always fun facts. So I write all of these, I research them all, and that is the one I spend the longest time crafting and searching. So, thank you so much for joining us, Tommy. I've earmarked you for ages. I've known you for quite a while, and I earmarked you. And we decided, you and I were in consults to use, the sad news of Lewis Moody, the English rugby union player, ex-professional, ex-international. And his new diagnosis of motor neuron disease. So, for some context on this, he's been on record saying that during his career he experienced a number of concussions and numerous head impacts. He also recounts a specific instance where he was instantly knocked out during a World Cup match and then felt the pressure to continue. And so we've talked a bit about this before, on the podcast, that sort of thing. And I guess a simple question to you to start this all off is like, are these things related, or is it too early to tell? Like, is it just availability bias? Where do we land on this?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think there are two answers. One is the formal academic answer, and one is what everybody kind of knows,
Sure.
but it's hard to prove. So the first is, right now, nobody will really say formally that concussions, head impacts, taking part in impact sports is a risk factor for motor neuron disease, ALS, or other dementias, Alzheimer's disease, and other dementias that might be related to recurrent head impacts, something that we call CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy. However, almost wherever you look in the literature on people who've played these sports to a high level or for a long period of time, you see an increased risk of neurodegenerative conditions compared to the general population. So these things are impossible to really prove, right? Because you can never do a randomized controlled trial. Even if you apply the Bradford Hill criteria, the risks are increased, but they're not so massive like smoking and lung cancer that you can just easily say this is a definite thing. Plus, everybody's career is very different. But when you look at, say, football, and I'm start talking what I would call football.
Just correct me here, because you live in the US with a British accent, so I'm not sure which one that means. That's no clear to me.
I mean soccer, association football.
Got you.
And when you look at football players, and there was a large study done in Sweden, for example, outfield players, thought to be because they're heading the ball or because you get sort of head-on-head collisions in the box, they have an increased risk of dementia compared to people like them in the general population. They didn't see an increased risk of motor neuron disease or ALS. But when you then look at NFL players, so American football players, there's been a couple of studies that have suggested they're at increased risk of ALS, and that the risk increases the longer their career was. Again, so suggesting that maybe the number of collisions, the number of impacts they were exposed to increase the risk. A similar study I don't think has been done in rugby players. However, this certainly makes sense. Sort of the types of collisions are very similar in rugby and American football. I think the risk is slightly less in rugby because they do a better job of protecting the head. Tackling isn't just throwing yourself at the other guy with reckless abandon. But I think these sort of different bits of evidence do kind of line up. So while it's certainly possible that other things contributed to, or it's definite that other things will contribute to any individual diagnosis, I think overall, participating in these sports, particularly at a high level or for a long period of time, seems to be associated with an increased risk of several types of neurodegenerative condition. And so I think that's important now that people are starting to recognize this, and then we can figure out, what can we do about it. So you can never say why one particular case happened. But I think at the sort of population level, it's becoming clearer that these are not benign things, that, having concussions, being knocked out, then having to continue to play because heat stress and all these other things that happen after a concussion then impact the outcome of that concussion. And, athletes get hot when they're working hard, and a whole bunch of other things that go on at the same time. So I think that now we can kind of say it's very likely that it's contributing to a large number of these cases in those athletes who played these sports.
Yeah, I think that just for listeners, the Bradfield-Hill criteria are a set of, I guess, statements and circumstances in which we can maybe not show direct causality, but with enough strength in the Bradfield criteria, we start to consider it. And the example you gave was smoking and lung cancer, because there's no research board in the world would allow you to run a randomized control trial for 30 years of forcing some people to smoke and preventing other people from smoking. So
Yeah, exactly.
it's a means with which, and you can look those up. They're widely published. So I guess in this context, do you think we're going to see an uptick in this? Because, Lewis Moody was playing in the early 2000s. I was still at school playing it myself. And I remember some concussion rules we had. And I feel like they probably didn't even apply at the professional level at that time because we were still schoolboys. And I'm wondering if we're going to see more of this before we see less of this. And if there's a real increase here, or if we're just... Because there's two things that can always happen, right? You can have an increase, or you can have an increased awareness, and therefore we talk about it more. So, there's only been... that I can think of probably 4 or 5 rugby union players who've had real problems that we would consider here. US van der Westhuizen with ALS. We had Lewis Moody. We had his teammate Steve Thompson as well come out and talk about it. And so there's probably a handful of others, but not too many, which is not a big number if we're really honest about the number of players that played at that time. So what's your gut on this? Are we going to see an increase? I guess there's 2 questions there. Are we going to see an increase because there's a time lag between the new sort of care around these head injuries? And do you think we're seeing an actual uptick or just an increased awareness?
So probably my guess is both.
Yeah.
There is certainly a time lag, but you have to remember that some of these guys who are now being diagnosed, they're really young. Steve Thompson's in his 40s.
Yep.
Right? So, and being diagnosed with dementia or having symptoms of significant memory and other problems that early in life should be very rare. So I think that it's likely that more of this stuff will be uncovered over time. Of course, in general, as people get older, they're at increased risk of, so if we just talk about dementia more broadly, they're at an increased risk of dementia. And there are a whole bunch of other factors that also increase the risk of dementia. So one good example, which is relevant to a lot of players of these impact sports, is we know that metabolic health is a critical component of how likely you are to get dementia or not later in life. And if you're a professional athlete who then retires and gains a bunch of weight and continues to eat the way you did when you were training several hours a day, we know it's very common for these athletes then to develop other health problems because of that. And so there may be an interaction there, right? You developed all this increased risk because of the playing career, and then other things happen afterwards that kind of exacerbate that risk. And so part of understanding this is going to be disentangling all those different pieces, which is incredibly difficult. But I think we are probably going to see more of that, especially as participation in some of these sports has increased over time, and was definitely increasing in the early 2000s and 2010s, and some of those issues may not be uncovered for another 3 or 4 decades. But you're right that we'll be talking about it more, so we'll be thinking about it more. And this is the case with pretty much any condition, that the more we go looking for it, the more we'll find it. Yeah. So there's a few different parts of this. One is, well, how do we think about protecting the brains of people who are going to be playing these sports anyway?
Yep.
And then the other part is, well, how do we deal with risk factors that people have for dementia, regardless of whether they played rugby or American football or not? And I think both of those are important, regardless of how good or how strong the connection is between playing rugby and getting dementia, right? These things will be reported, right? We should have fewer concussions in contact sports if possible. And we should help people minimize their risk of dementia, regardless of other things. So I think we probably don't need to spend a bunch of time. People will, because it's interesting and important. We probably don't have to spend a bunch of time figuring out what's the exact contribution of those things to dementia, because both of those scenarios and things that we need to work on are going to be important regardless.
So I've been thinking about this quite a bit, partially in preparation for this podcast, partially just in general, thinking about the brain as an organ, as we do the heart, as we do the lungs, as we do the kidneys, as we do all those things, whereby there are, we have end-stage disease in all of these things, chronic or acute end-stage diseases. And there seems to be a capacity, from my clinical work, there seem to be some people who could damage an organ horribly and it would not end up in end-stage disease, and people who would be very unlucky and would do minimal damage and end up with a problem, right? And so there seems to be this, obviously, genetic component to it, but there's also like a reserve or a capacity that you could develop in it, right? So heart disease is the classic example where you can develop, very classically is like a bunch of aerobic training, develop a lot of reserve in that heart function, right? So do you think about the brain that way? Am I wrong thinking about it this way? Or how do you think about it?
No, I think about it in the same way. And I think anybody who's an athlete can kind of understand this principle. And in my book, I talk a lot about how the brain is very similar to either skeletal muscle or the cardiac muscle in terms of how we train it for physical performance. And that's because the primary driver of brain function is how we use our brain, how we stimulate it to improve function, because we adapt in response to greater demand, and we place greater demand and give the capacity and time to then adapt. We see greater function afterwards. In the brain, there are a few different ways to measure this that are sort of well described in the literature. I roll them up all into one thing that I call headroom. So headroom being like the maximum capacity that you have in the system being your brain. And it's, one way you can measure it is the difference between like, how well does your brain function on like a day-to-day basis to do all the kind of the same things that you do every day, versus like how much capacity, like how well can your brain perform when it's like maximally stressed, when you're like really focused, when you're like really digging into something difficult. Sort of that difference is maybe what you would call your headroom. The things that you kind of intimated towards are resilience and reserve. And brain resilience and brain reserve are slightly different, but they are impacted by some of the same factors. Reserve can actually have two components. One is brain reserve and one is cognitive reserve, which are essentially like the hardware and the software. So brain reserve is just like, how much brain do you have in your skull? Like the more brain that you have inside your skull, the better, essentially. And we want to have as much physical buffer, just like you want to have, in your 30s and 40s, you want to develop as much muscle mass as you can, ideally, because you're going to lose some as you get older. And the brain is essentially the same. So your brain reserve is how much total brain volume do you have, because you need to lose a certain amount before cognitive function may start to decline. Cognitive reserve is similar, but for function. Like how much total function do you have? And you can measure that across multiple different paradigms, different types of memory, executive function, decision making. There's all these different parts of cognitive function that go in something called crystallized intelligence, which is basically a fancy word for wisdom, like how you can understand how all these different things in your experiences come together to kind of see the bigger picture. And then, so that's cognitive reserve. And then resilience is how much injury or pathology can your brain take before you start to lose some function. So we know that over time, as you get older, the things are going to get a little rusty. You're going to lose a little bit of function here. You're going to aggregate some proteins that, like amyloid and tau, that kind of appear in the brain as we get older. And some of that is the formal process of Alzheimer's disease, but some just happens as we get older regardless. And so how much of that buildup can you take before function starts to decline? That's resilience. And all of those things seem to be, even though we measure them slightly differently, seem to be driven primarily by lifestyle factors. So physical activity is really important for reserve. It helps maintain the size of certain parts of the brain, but it's also important for resilience. So your brain is less likely to activate inflammatory or stress responses in response to the buildup of certain proteins in the brain. And so you can maintain function for longer. So ideally what you want is, enough resilience and reserve such that as you get older, and some of these things are going to accumulate, you're going to lose a little function. That's perfectly normal. We can't stop that yet. Ideally, you then have enough capacity in the system that you never decline so much that you can't look after yourself on a day-to-day basis, which is what we call dementia. Ideally, right, you lose a little bit and then you die of something else. That's kind of the goal. And all of that is built by creating as much capacity in the system as you can, and then creating maintenance processes. Just like when we exercise, we upregulate things like autophagy, which help to sort of recycle junky proteins and all these kinds of things that can impair function. And the brain is essentially the same.
So you talked about lifestyle factors. Let's double click there for now. I was going to go there later, but let's go there now. So you already talked about exercise, and look, these athletes are doing that, and so are our listeners, right? And we can talk about types of exercise, because I know you're passionate in the strength realm, and as am I. It's my background, despite running a lot more recently. I come from strength sports. There's obviously a dietary component to this, and we don't have to go into diet wars, but eat a healthy diet is probably, with enough omega-3s and creatine is probably my take home here for brain health. And please jump in and correct me if I'm wrong there. Mm-hmm. There's obviously sleep is a big one that we, sort of people would know a lot about. Then there's, avoiding toxins, call that alcohol, etc. And this is actually part of why I think these players, double clicking back in the 2000s, like there's a lot of drinking, and certainly probably a lot of drinking post-injury, which is like the worst thing you could possibly do, right? So I think that's a huge component of it as well. Is there anything else that people should be, and then, stimulation is classically the thing. So that's kind of where your space is. It's 5 languages, it's university degrees, it's all that stuff. And there is good research, to my understanding, showing that those things are protective for brain health, as I understand it.
Yeah. So rather than creating these really extensive lists of all these different things that are important, and there are lots of things that are important, you could dig into the literature, you could find 30, 40, 50 things that contribute to your risk of cognitive function, cognitive decline, many of the neurodegenerative disorders that we've already talked about. For me, it's more helpful to think about like what are the sort of the core buckets, and then a little bit of what goes into those core buckets and how those buckets interact.
Yeah.
So in my book, I have this thing I call the 3S model. And that kind of describes the primary buckets that are required to build and maintain cognitive function. So the first S is stimulation or stimulus. And like you said, there's lots of evidence to suggest that how we use our brains, like create cognitive demand, just like creating physical demand, drives adaptation. That's what primarily drives how our brains develop in the first place, and then how they maintain and build function, in the decades afterwards. So we're talking things like skill learning, social interaction, education seems to be one of the most protective factors for long-term cognitive function. And there's several studies that suggest that your cognitive function peaks around the time you finish formal education. So it peaks higher and it peaks later the longer you spend in school, which is great for me because I basically spent my entire adult life as a student. And so like people sometimes raise their eyebrows. I'm like, education is really good for your brain. They're like, well, you're basically a professional student, so you would say that. But I think that doesn't mean that we all need to do that. What it tells me, and what you can see it from some animal studies and a whole bunch of observational studies in other arenas as well, is that spending that time essentially where you're a professional learner, like all you're doing is your job is to create cognitive demand, right? Your job is to stimulate your brain so that you acquire new skills and new information. And then while you're doing that, you are building capacity in the system. So you don't have to do that at university, right? You can do that anywhere in the world. It just requires being engaged in that process of learning. But then what happens later in life is we stop doing that, right? We just rely on the things we've already learned, and we just do the same stuff again and again and again and again and again. And that then sort of maps onto that period of cognitive decline that statistically begins sometimes in your 30s, but actually that's not really true. The majority of people are actually perfectly capable of maintaining cognitive function well into their 80s. It's just the average declines over time, because some people will be losing cognitive function. And so that's where we can really make a big difference, is later in life continuing to stimulate the brain in the same ways. So that's the primary driver of function, I think, is stimulus. Just like, if you want to have bigger biceps, which I recommend everybody try to get, you can improve or maximize the likelihood that you'll increase your bicep size by eating enough protein and getting plenty of sleep and all that kind of stuff. But if you don't do any bicep curls, right, more naps is not going to help you get bigger biceps. And so the primary driver is stimulus. But then for the brain, there are these two other buckets that I think are just as important. It's just thinking about sort of how they interact and what drives that sort of process of adaptation and function. So the next bucket is supply. And supply is multiple components, but basically if you stimulate or activate a part of the brain or a network of the brain with a certain cognitive activity, you're learning a language, for example, playing a video game, those areas of the brain start to ask for more blood supply, right? There's this thing called neurovascular coupling, which is basically the neurons fire, the blood vessels in that area dilate to send more resources to that area of the brain in order to support the increased activity. So that means that we need a healthy vascular system, right? So many people have said that what's good for the heart is good for the brain, and I think that's largely true, because we need a responsive, pliable, functional cardiovascular system, like from the heart all the way through to the small blood vessels. So anything that increases the risk of cardiovascular disease also seems to increase the risk of cognitive decline and dementia. Then we need energy substrate. This is where metabolic health becomes really important. So good availability of glucose or lactate or ketones or whatever your preferred metabolic substrate for the brain is, and the brain being and your metabolic health being good enough that those substrates make it into the part of the brain that needs them. And then the final part of supply is nutrients. So there are specific nutrients that are very important for building and maintaining the structure of the synapses, the mitochondria, like all these different parts of the brain. And some of the ones that we know are most important, because deficiency increases the risk of dementia and cognitive decline, are B vitamins, particularly the homocysteine lowering B vitamins, so B12, folate, riboflavin, which is B2, and B6. Omega-3 fatty acids that you already mentioned, primarily the long chain omega-3 fatty acids. So EPA, really important for vascular function. DHA, really important for synapse function and mitochondrial function in the brain. And there are now several studies that show that omega-3 status and B vitamin status interact. So you might know that there are dozens of studies that gave people omega-3 fatty acids and it didn't have any effect on dementia. And everybody's like, oh, omega-3s don't work. And historically, there were also lots of studies that used B vitamins to try and prevent dementia, and they didn't really work. It was like, well, B vitamins don't really matter. But now at least 3 or 4 trials have shown, randomized control trials in older adults have shown that if you supplement with omega-3s, but you have poor B vitamin status, you don't benefit. And vice versa. So if you supplement with the B vitamins, but you have poor omega-3 status, you don't benefit. If you have both, you see a slowed rate of cognitive decline, a slowed rate of brain atrophy, and improved measures of cognitive function. This makes sense because if you want your DHA from your lovely piece of salmon to make its way into your brain and do the things that DHA does, it needs several things. One, you might improve metabolic health because insulin resistance may impair some of the uptake of DHA into the brain. But you also need that to be attached to a phospholipid, which is like what puts fats into cell membranes. And that process requires methylation, which requires B vitamins. So you need all these different components to kind of align. But B vitamins, omega-3s, iron is critically important. Vitamin D, and those are kind of the heavy hitters. Magnesium becomes really important as well. Other things that seem to pop up as being important again and again and again include polyphenols, antioxidant polyphenols. Those can eat like astaxanthin, lutein, zeaxanthin. That can either come from colorful vegetables or from like the pink color in seafood, as well as the anthocyanins that you get from things like berries, those kind of like purple colors. People who have more of those in their brain tend to have better cognitive function later into life. So that's kind of my supply bucket. And then the last bucket is support. So you've already mentioned sleep. And in reality, the third S could be sleep, but there are some other things that are important too. But so you've stimulated the brain, you've given it all the things that it needs in order to respond to that stimulus. And then so that it can adapt to that stimulus for improved function, it needs a period of rest and recovery and adaptation. So that primarily happens during sleep. But it can also be impaired by other things that kind of come under that support bucket. So we know that chronic stress increases the risk of dementia and cognitive decline, as well as a number of mental health issues. And part of the reason for that, I think, is because stress almost creates like an overtraining type picture in the brain. Basically, it's hyper metabolic, so it like increases demand without ever allowing the brain to like fully recover and adapt. So minimizing as much as you can, and there are a bunch of strategies in the book in terms of how we can like approach stress to kind of minimize the impact of stressful conditions or chronic stresses. And then you mentioned alcohol, and I think everybody's like, anybody who played rugby like knows that like first you go and bash your head against some other guys, and then you go and drink 8 pints in the pub. Like that's just what you do or what you did. And smoking is another one. Air pollution is a critical component to that as well. So there are a number of things that we can kind of expose ourselves to that prevent that sort of adaptation and improvement of function. So those kind of all go in my support bucket. So then people can maybe understand like where across all those buckets they might see the biggest impact. And it's important because all of these things interact, right? It's not a list of sort of unrelated factors, because when you stimulate the brain, you drive more of that supply into the brain. So it's kind of like asking for more. And similarly, when you stimulate the brain, you drive greater processes and demand for the process of adaptation. So when you stimulate a certain part of the brain, that part of the brain has greater sleep pressure that night. And there are actually studies in older adults that show that if you give them some cognitive training, it improves their sleep, because it kind of your brain demands more sleep, and some of the worsening sleep that people experience as they get older might just be that they're not using their brains, so their brains don't need to sleep. So all of these things interact, and then you can kind of understand, oh yeah, well this is the bucket maybe where I can see the biggest benefit, because I've got these kind of other things covered.
Geez, I love that. That's great. I love a good system. We talked a bit about your book before we started, and I was like really excited. I haven't read any yet, I will confess that, but I am very keen to, and I'll be pre-ordering a copy. But yeah, that the systems thinking is something I really enjoy. So yeah, that's great. Is there anything else? I mean, so let's go this way. We've got a huge audience of endurance athletes.
Yeah.
And we know you're a bicep advocate. Let's talk strength versus endurance when it comes to the brain, because I think there's some value here. Because again, I was often on the start line of a marathon with maybe not the biggest biceps, but certainly probably the best back squat there. So mostly because it's a battle of the minnows on the start line. So how do we land when it comes to, obviously you talked about already supply and the benefits of the heart, but then and in an untrained population, heck, a set of bicep curls is probably going to improve their VO2 max. But let's assume people are relatively well trained. Let's talk a bit about the benefits of strength.
Yeah, what's interesting is that different types of exercise seem to benefit the brain in different ways. So you need, ideally, to have some of both, and that's one of the reasons why my coach I reluctantly do the cardio that my coach programs. But so we'll start with, if you're already doing a large volume of aerobic work, we know that particularly benefits the gray matter of the brain. So that's kind of like the outside. If you think about the brain as this kind of like wrinkly walnut looking thing, on the outside, sort of like the outermost layers of that's the cortex, that's gray matter. There's also some gray matter like deeper inside. But aerobic training seems to benefit the gray matter, and in terms of cognitive function seems to particularly benefit memory. So the outer gray matter, as well as some of the inside gray matter, including the hippocampus, which is kind of like just inside the brain, like near your ears. It's like in the temporal lobe, the medial temporal area. And the hippocampus is really critical for memory. There was a very nice study recently done in Australia where they took older adults and they made them they had like multiple different types of training, but they had like a control group. They had just like a moderate intensity group. It was like, 40 minutes of running at sort of like 70% of VO2 max, something like that. And then they had a group that did the Norwegian 4x4 protocol. And they did that 3 times a week for 6 months. I mean, that's pretty intense.
Yeah.
Good on them. But what they found was that particularly in that high intensity group, they saw improvements in multiple aspects of hippocampal function. And that was sustained for like years afterwards, after just 6 months of training. In a sedentary population, about a decade ago, there was a study that just used brisk walking, 40 minutes of brisk walking 3 times a week. And even that improved hippocampal size and some aspects of cognitive function as well. So aerobic training particularly improves those areas of the brain. Strength training, by comparison, and it's been shown in randomized controlled trials again, particularly improves the white matter. So that's the bit that's like in between that outer gray matter and then areas like the hippocampus below. And that's what's responsible for like the fast connections that we experience, as well as some of our most complex cognitive functions. So as you kind of go up the evolutionary ladder from like mice, through, various rodents and cats and, other primates and into humans, the main thing you see is an expansion of the amount of white matter that you have in the brain. So humans have more than 60% of their brain is white matter. And resistance training seems to improve the strength or both the volume and the structure of the white matter. And with that comes improvements, particularly in global cognition. So that's usually like just like the sum of lots of different cognitive function tests, as well as executive function. So that's like decision making. When people, when I sort of describe what executive function is, it's that thing when when you want to say something, but then at the last minute you're like, oh, I shouldn't say that. That's a really stupid thing to say. That's executive function, and that's primarily your like prefrontal cortex doing its job.
I should probably do some more strength training then. I need a better filter on this. But anyway, carry on.
I mean, sometimes it's okay to be unfiltered, of course. But so that's where strength training really seems to benefit. And some of it, and some of this difference probably comes from the different things that are released from the muscles during different types of exercise. So strength training particularly seems to increase the release of IGF-1. And IGF-1 is critical to the development and function of white matter. So it's more complicated than that, of course. Like we don't even know all the things that get released during exercise that benefit health, but because we release different things with different types of exercise and they have different functions on different parts of the brain. One sort of last piece is that on top of just like aerobic and strength training, coordinative exercise seems to be particularly beneficial. And there are some meta-analyses that suggest that actually the only type of exercise that like really robustly improves cognitive function is coordinative exercise. So that's something where you are required to respond to the environment in real time. So, it's very nice to like sit on your turbo and then go and do some bicep curls, but it might be better to go like do a dance class, play badminton, table tennis, board sports, right? Skateboarding, surfing, all, team sports. Maybe not ones where you like bash your head against other people, depending on how you're concerned you're about that. But that kind of those elements of social interaction, as well as those elements of responding to the environment, much more complex motor patterns. those things all seem to come together to have an outsized effect on cognitive function. So there are studies that show if you take some people and you put them in a dance class, and then you have a control group that does some kind of unimodal, either weight training or running or something like that. So it's the physical exertion is the same in both. The dance class will result in better improvements in cognitive function because there are all these other components that it has in addition just to like the physical component. So how we can then enact that is not all of your cardio sessions have to be zone 2 jogs, right? They could be a dance class, they could be a game of football, right? They could be some badminton. There are lots of other ways that we can get that same physical stimulus, particularly if we have a sport we want to compete in, but that then provide additional benefits on top. Or if we're not competitive athletes competing in a sport, think about other ways that require you to respond to the environment, interact with others, to get your exercise that are probably more enjoyable, to be honest, a lot of the time, and may therefore give slightly larger effects in terms of brain health.
Awesome. That's so good. I know you've got a hard out, Tommy. I wanted to ask a couple of questions. They may be too long, and if they're too long, let's just pass on them. But a couple of quicker ones. Back to sort of some of the stuff we touched on to start with, just to round some of that conversation off. Do you think we're getting any closer to an objective test for a concussion, like a blood test or anything like this? I know Abbott had brought out a point of care sort of device. Do you think we're anywhere near that?
Actually, there are some things that do seem to work pretty well. It just depends on they're technically difficult to implement. That's part of the problem. So yes, you can do there's a saliva test for certain proteins that get released during a brain injury. Those are definitely better than nothing. They're definitely better than were you knocked out or not, which is historically that was the line, that was what created a diagnosis of a concussion. So I think that will improve over time. There are lots of people researching different microRNAs, these other things that might be even more sensitive. Can you measure them in saliva rather than blood? Pick them up quickly. That technology is improving all the time. I think two other things that should be a part of that battery and are in certain sports, so particularly in collegiate athletics in the US, a lot of universities, if not most of them, where people are at risk of a concussion, they'll have like a baseline cognitive function test. And then you can look for deviations in performance from that test after a concussion. Some of the tests they use, some colleagues of a colleague of mine here at the University of Washington, she recently published a paper to say, maybe the current tests aren't the best, they aren't the most sensitive, but there are some other tests that are coming online that will help. Then the last piece, which I think is maybe going to be the most sensitive, is there are measures of EEG that you can track after a concussion. The problem is that they're technically difficult. Like you have to arrange electrodes on the head. You need to do something called evoked potentials. So you need to expose the person to like certain auditory or visual stimuli, and then you measure how quickly the brain like responds to that stimulus based on like the electrical activity in the brain. So there's something called brain vital signs. That's one version of that. There are lots of companies that offer these kinds of things, and they do seem to track pretty well with picking up a concussion and then recovery from a concussion, but they're not yet like standard. They're not yet standard of care because we're sort of like right at the beginning of kind of standardizing those processes and doing the research on it. But I think if you're trying to understand, is there an impact that has changed the physical function of the brain, right? So it's been bad enough to actually affect function. Even if the person says they're okay, the easiest way to do it is to go as close to the source as possible. So measuring activity in the brain is probably going to be the best way to do that. But again, I think that's coming, and I hope that will be available soon. I will say that in many of the sports where I exist, people don't always want the best concussion measurement because that might prevent them being able to play the sport that's critical to their livelihood. And I totally get that, right? That's that's a separate conversation, right? So one is, will we get better at detecting concussions? The answer is yes. The other question is, will people want that? That's still an open question, and that's going to be down to both the regulatory bodies and the athletes themselves.
And the coaches and the staff. We just saw a case in the NFL where a coach went into the medical tent where he shouldn't have been. We discussed on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, in the Ironman World Championships, the person who was coming in second, really struggling of heat stress and being pulled out of the race. And I said, easy decision in second, not so easy in first.
Yeah.
Or easier in second, not so easy in first. So, you and I both work clinically, and it's a difficult. The stuff is easy in a sterile environment, and in the battlefield or in the sporting field, it's very difficult. So,
yeah, absolutely.
You do have a hard out, Tommy. I'm going to leave you go. What I would do is
you have one more question. Let's do it.
I've got a couple more. So what I was going to say is I was going to point people towards your review, which is one of my favorite pieces. It's probably the paper I've shared the most recently, which is Mitigating Traumatic Brain Injury, a narrative review of supplementation and dietary protocols. I have a link in the show notes. That is great for anybody who's interested in, say, their own concussion or children's concussions risk. It's a good piece for them. It talks about pre-concussion, post-concussion, and what to do in those contexts. And I think it's really accessible to open access. So that's great. And I would also direct people to a podcast on your podcast feed where you talked about heading the football in junior football. Soccer, that is. So in the soccer world, it was talking about should we ban heading, because there was a discussion at the time in the UK, and I think I would direct people to that rather than having a conversation here. Go listen to your podcast. I'll push people there. I'll put a link to your podcast in the show notes. I have already got a link to that article, and I have a link to your website where people can pre-order your book. So
thanks so much. I appreciate all that. I don't have to do any selling for myself because you did it for me. So.
You sold yourself by being here and being a very willing guest and very helpful. So thank you so much for your time, Tommy.
Thanks so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
That was Associate Professor Tommy Wood. Good chat, man. You were solo for that one. No one to hold your hand. Well done. You made it through on the other side.
Mate, that's a terrible joke you keep making. I keep telling you there's only one of us who's hosted this podcast without the other one. So we'll be doing a bit more solo stuff coming up. Interview-wise, you've got a busy patch on. We've got a couple of interviews coming up. And we're banking a couple of interviews for some time in December because you need to spend some time away. So we are getting there. You will still have episodes every week, everybody. So please do. We do appreciate the support. That does make it worth it, does help us. So please do rate the podcast if you haven't. Of course, follow it if you're not yet. And share the podcast is always helpful. And then comment, share, all those things, because that's also part of the episode. We appreciate you being part of the community.
We have this feature on every episode now called Seen on Social, where we look at some social media content comes across our feed that we might not think is as accurate as it could be and might need a gentle nudge in the right direction. This week's one, I saw this, you showed me this. It said, New York City Marathon is harder to get into than Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. Is that true or not?
This is a case of statistics. There's this classic quote, statistics are like children. You can get them to say whatever you want. And it's I mean, if you go, what percentage of applicants get in, then I'm sure this is true, right? But because you don't have entry criteria, everybody enters the New York Marathon. And because you do have entry criteria for Princeton, Yale, and Harvard, people are discouraged. I never considered applying for those. Why? Because I didn't meet the criteria. It's not that I didn't want to go. It's that I wasn't going to get a look in. So you don't even bother applying. So, ballot isn't merit, and therefore you have a different number of applicants. If you wanted to give a better idea of this, you go Boston Marathon, where people have a qualifying time, and then you get a better understanding, right? Also, even if New York City had a qualifier, if you look at what it is, it's actually not that hard to get into, as a percentage. So the Boston qualifier is what it is. But if you want to get into the New York Marathon, one of the ways you can do it is go to a New York Roadrunners race and run a good enough time. And that time is much easier. I don't remember exactly what it is. I think it was a 1:20 half for me in the Brooklyn half, which, I think translates up to probably, maybe it's around the same as the Boston Marathon qualifier. But anyway, what I'm getting at here is it is absolutely easier to get into the New York City Marathon because you just apply for a few years and eventually you may or may not get in. Whereas at Princeton, you can apply your whole life and no one will ever take a look at it. They won't even open the envelope.
Just look at yourself, look at your friends group, ask yourself, can I get into the New York City Marathon? Yeah, I'm pretty sure I can. And I'll ask myself, can I get into Harvard, Yale, or Princeton? No bloody chance.
It's a good way to put it, yeah.
Let's get to the doctor's office. Sadly, last week we mentioned some deaths in the doctor's office, and again this week, sadly, unfortunately, two men, died in the swim during the Ironman 70.3 in Mossel Bay in South Africa. Which I had a friend sort of comment saying maybe we should look at more strict criteria for people to enter Ironmans and 70.3s, because in South Africa, for instance, Comrades Marathon, Two Oceans Marathon, Ultra Marathon has got strict enter qualifying criteria. But I think it's really the water that is the main issue. I'm not sure if you agree with me.
I mean, it certainly seems to be where people have problems. You could certainly have a qualifier there. You could make them have done an Olympic distance triathlon.
Mm. Mm.
Like your first day doing a triathlon shouldn't be a 70.3. I think that's a fair rule. So you could certainly ask them to have done something else. So like, hey, just what are the races you've done? Run a couple of local races, things like that. So I think some level of entry criteria would be smart for safety reasons.
Probably not a bad idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how high the bar has to be, but like if you haven't done an Olympic distance triathlon, I don't think you have any business doing something else. Now that might be a little bit different, right? When Mathieu van der Poel turns up, he's probably gonna be okay, right? Like maybe he doesn't have to do that, but again, even we talked about this with Jan Frodeno, like maybe having qualification is good, like make him do it. So again, it's a safety issue.
Yeah, the one thing that Ironman does do is they don't allow you to warm up in the water. You're not allowed to go in the water before the race, which is also, to me, something they should probably really look at, because this is a sea swim, Mossel Bay. The water traditionally can be very cold. So you running into the water at the start of your race with a spiked heart rate, hitting the cold water, tension, people swimming all on top of each other. It's, that's something that needs to be looked at. Whereas if you've had not just the land warm up, but a water warm up as well, I don't know, might be better. All things to look at. And then a few weeks ago, we also talked about Eli Katoa. Did I say that right? Was in the doctor's office?
Yeah, so he had a pretty bad, we talked about 3 head knocks, ended up getting brain surgery and stuff. So I just wanted to update here. So it sounds like he's got discharged from the Auckland hospital. He's traveled back to Melbourne to finish off his recovery in Australia, which is cool. I heard a story of the coach, the Tongan coach, actually staying with him in New Zealand and like going to visit him in the hospital and stuff for quite a while, which I think was really, it's great from a coach. I love to see that. So yeah.
That is good. That tells me about culture. Maybe it's just the individual, but it probably speaks also more to the culture of the environment. Hopefully, that's really good.
Yeah.
Okay, before we get out of here, we're gonna get some coffees, man. I'm desperate for a great cappuccino with no chocolate on top, London. But before we do, what are we watching this weekend?
There's more rugby on, so I'll be watching that. That's probably the big one. Springboks are playing Ireland. That'll be the big one that I'll watch. And then some more NFL, mate. Steelers got a big win yesterday. We were watching bits of it. I forced you to watch some NFL Red Zone. You were like, what is this chaos?
I was like, it was really interesting. Learning the rules. Very interesting. I'll be watching it through a different lens now.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. What about you, mate? What are you watching? You copying my homework again? Same thing.
No, Saturday is my birthday, so yeah, I need the Springboks to win as a nice birthday present, and I need Manchester United to win as well as a nice gift over there. But mostly for the first half of the day, I'm going on safari, Big 5 safari, so I'll hopefully be watching lions and elephants and coming home in the afternoon to some good sport, man. Wow. Let's get out of here. It is coffee time, David. Thank you so much for producing this and putting it together. If you're still listening at this point to the podcast, we ask that you would please subscribe if you haven't done so, or share this episode with a friend. And we launch a new episode every single Friday. David, thank you so much, and we'll catch you next week.
Thank you. See you soon, mate.